Okay, hi everyone. Our next talk and speaker is Professor Derek Keats, the Executive Director of Information and Communication Services at the University of Western Cape in South Africa. Derek started as a marine biologist with very strong interest in using technology to improve teaching and learning and to establish higher education in the developing world. To respond to the challenges of globalization and promote sustainable development while maintaining the quality of the environment. So subjects very close to our heart here at Google. He established the Internet BioEd project and the Internet for Environmental Education projects in the 1990s, which were a bit ahead of their time for South Africa. And he also established the International Ocean Institute Southern Africa and was director of it for 4 years. Derek Keats has published over 75 research papers in biology and in the application of technology. The talk this afternoon is going to focus on his current research interests, including e-collaboration and lessons for international collaboration of free and open source software. This relates to both free and open content and Education 3.0. So the focus will be the African Virtual Open Initiatives and Research Project. Derek has a passion about the potential of ICT-based collaboration to unify expertise within Africa and stimulate development. So with that, I'll hand over to Professor Derek Keats, and I'd just like to mention that this is going to be recorded and will go externally as well, so you know in terms of asking questions. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Zaida. This talk is about a network that we are in the process of building and growing, or we have already built and are in the process of growing in Africa to build capacity in software engineering by doing free and open source software development. And the project is called the African Virtual Open Initiatives and Resources, or AVOIR, if you know the French verb to have. What I'm going to do is to tell a little bit of a potpourri of stories. So you're not going to get anything in a lot of detail, but if you want the details, I'd be more than happy to answer questions at the end of the talk. We just came from Building 43, and we saw this wonderful animation of Google's search queries from around the world, and a line flashed up on the screen. Africa is mostly dark, because it has not got as many people using computers as the developed world. And this is an old picture that dates back, I think, to about 1994, which people were using as desktop backgrounds quite popularly in those days. And it shows lights of the world kind of composite from space. And if you take a sample, a random sample, anywhere in the developed world, you will find very high concentrations of these lights. And if you take a random sample in the developing world, you won't find such high concentrations. And this is actually a good proxy for other things, such as technology, research, and development capacity, including things like software engineering. And when you look at this, it's kind of a little bit of a depressing scenario. If you live in Africa and are as passionate about the potential of the continent as I am, and you look at this and you think, well, there's just nothing there. But actually, that's not true. The dots are there. It's just that the space between them is greater than what it is in the developed world. And so if we can change the scale of our thinking, we can actually do things, perhaps, that we might think otherwise could only be done in the developed world. And this is the great thing about the internet, is if we can use it as a glue to glue together our activities, we can build kind of virtual concentrations of expertise and skills and do things that we would otherwise not be able to do because the skills are simply not concentrated enough. There isn't a critical mass at any one particular site. I spent most of the day yesterday at Stanford, and there's probably more skills and expertise in that one university than there is in the entire continent. But nevertheless, if we can create these virtual concentrations, we can do some really interesting things. So that's what the African Virtual Open Initiatives and Resources Project is all about. It's about casting a wider net and creating synergy among people doing things, often in isolation or isolated in institutions with relatively weak bandwidth and poor internet connectivity. And then to use the talent that we have to build more talent. as opposed to what a lot of development aid type activities do is pilot in consultants who basically just come in and leave behind a pile of garbage, and what ends up happening is actually development of the developed world rather than development of the developing world. So we're trying to turn that paradigm on its head, as it were. But of course, we're not doing that in isolation. We do have connections outside of Africa with all sorts of things. And thanks to the Google Guest Network, I was just sitting at a picnic table outside because I arrived a little bit early, not knowing how long it took to get here from my hotel. And I was having a chat with two colleagues who are in Afghanistan at the moment, implementing software that was made 100% made in Africa. And I think that's pretty cool. Having united this team and effort across multiple institutions. So why software engineering? Well, I'm passionate about the potential of collaboration in all sorts of fields, but I am also a closet geek who recently came out of the closet. So when you find me with an idle moment, you will often find me writing code. If I don't have to write some report or some other kind of document, that's what I tend to do with my spare time. But it's interesting that the barriers to entry for software engineering are quite low. I mean, you basically just need some kind of a computer, and it doesn't have to be the highest end. And with free and open source software, you don't need to get anybody's permission to do the work. You can just begin if you have a computer of some kind. So really, the barriers to entry are as low as they can be. There is potential to create opportunities for economic growth, and we've seen that. We've created software and we've gone after business opportunities, and we've done things with that software that generates revenue for the project. And so this project in Afghanistan, for example, is a contract that we got as a consequence of working together to create software. So there are business opportunities there that can create development opportunities and economic growth. But very little collaborative software development is happening in Africa. A lot of what is actually being done at the moment, and if I look around and I know many of the people that are active in free and open source software, most of what is actually being done is implementation. So it's a consumption exercise rather than a production exercise. So what we wanted to do with the AVOIR project is to make it a production exercise, that we're learning how to develop things, not just learning how to implement things. So what does the project entail? We're trying to build human capacity in software engineering through collaborating to build software. All of our software is licensed under GNU General Public License, so it's all free software. To develop and support free software innovation in African higher education institutions. In a way, we're trying to get the camel's nose in the tent, and in my university, the whole camel is now in the tent. We have a policy on free and open source software in the university, and we have a policy on free and open content within the university. And we're doing this by uniting these scarce and dispersed skills. Of course, it doesn't do us any good to do anything that is less than world-class, so we are trying to do world-class innovative software and services in the process. And then, of course, create an ecosystem that promotes and strengthens kind of innovation within Africa through the transactions taking place in the ecosystem. So as an example of something that is taking place within the ecosystem, in my own university, we are at the end of life of a legacy student administration system. So we decided that we would work with this project and build an entirely free and open source student information management system using the tools, building on the tools that were developed in this project. And we now have 20-odd software engineers and business analysts and other people working on this project. And by next year, we will have a complete integrated student information management system that uses a services-oriented architecture. And so we're growing the ecosystem through our own institutional processes. And that's beginning to happen also in some of the other partner institutions. This was the team when we started off at the beginning of 2005 with the South African Minister of Science and Technology in the middle there, who is very passionate about free and open source software and just gave a really nice talk at our Digital Freedom Exposition that we had the week before last in Cape Town. As it stands at the moment now, most of the people in this team have replicated themselves at least 2 or 3 times, and so we're about 70 people now involved in the project from where we started about 2 years ago. Where we're distributed, There's two projects that work together. One is called AVOIR, and the other is called Netal Africa, which in essence is a master's program in ICT policy and regulation. And then there are some sites with which have implemented our software and that we are collaborating with. And so this gives you a sense of what areas we cover at the moment. Unfortunately, the dot in Egypt didn't happen, so I had to draw a line through it because I didn't have the original image to edit this morning. But everything else there is part of our network. So we do reach quite widely within the continent. There are four cornerstones of this initiative: collaborating, implementing, coding, and connecting. And collaborating basically is participating in the mailing list and keeping up to date with what people are doing, answering questions, asking questions, responding to user queries, all of those kinds of things. And we work almost entirely by mailing list. We just simply don't have the bandwidth to do much real-time collaboration, and so we work almost entirely by mailing list and with code repositories in CVS. And then, of course, it doesn't do us any good if we don't implement the products that we make, and so implementing is also part of being part of the network, as is connecting and creating other opportunities for the network to grow and for the network to implement its products in other places. So I mentioned Afghanistan as an example. We recently also just got a contract to do a social networking site for a Nordic Southern African collaboration initiative that's run by all the Nordic universities, the Scandinavian universities, in collaboration with their Southern African counterparts. And so that's going to be quite an interesting project as well. So there are opportunities to connect with other initiatives. For our participation in this project, we initiated a unit that we call the Free Software Innovation Unit. It doesn't get any university money. It's funded entirely by the work that it does. So if it doesn't connect and implement, it dies. And it's going quite strong at the moment. We have about 30 people in it, two of whom, as I just mentioned, are currently in Afghanistan. One has just come back from Ghana. And another is I think, heading off to, where? Somewhere in West Africa. I've forgotten where now, this week as well. So the first project was an application framework, which we called Kinky. Not a good choice of words. Kind of funny, but not a good choice of words, as it turns out. And an e-learning platform that we call Cool, Knowledge Environment for Web Learning. And Kinky stands for Kinky is not cool yet. You know, it's kind of this geeky play on words. But as it turns out, it wasn't good for business. And so we've changed the name, but I'll talk about that a little bit later. The idea is to look at what's happening in education and what's happening in the world of computer science and on the periphery of computer science, and to see whether we can actually build something that's at the intersection of those two, kind of on the cutting edge of both, but something that will work within our environment. So I just listened in on the last talk a little bit about 3D video. I mean, we could not do that in Africa because we simply don't have the bandwidth. So we have to focus on things that we can do in our environment, and it should be driven by users and practitioners, not by our enthusiasm for technology. And we should harness what I call the awesome potential of student projects. A lot of student projects get done, and they get filed into shelves, and the only thing they do is they create a market for bookshelf sellers. And so, you know, you get 100 theses in a shelf, and then you need to buy another bookshelf. So you buy another bookshelf, and then when you get another 100, what we try to do with this project is to give students an opportunity to contribute to something which will live beyond their thesis. And we've had some success with that. So far, every student that has participated in this project has contributed something that is still being used. I think the average is about 5%. So from 5% to 100%. A lot of the work that we do involves collaborative design. So there are teachers, lecturers, professors, whatever you want to call them, in the network. We work with the e-learning teams at the various universities and various e-learning projects. We work with the e-learning support people. We work with students. We get information from students. We have people doing e-learning research as part of our project. We work with software developers and computer scientists, obviously. And we have a social network researcher in our project as well, studying our own processes so that we can learn how to improve them, and we can use our project as a basis, as a kind of case study for others maybe wanting to do this, build this same kinds of collaborative networks. A picture being worth 1,000 words. I just thought I'd throw in a few pictures. This is University of Jos in Nigeria, where they're doing the training in the e-learning, use of the application in e-learning. Educators and developers got together last year in Ghana to discuss how the e-learning system might be beneficial to students at school level, what you call K-12 here. And Megan, shortly after that, went back to Ghana and got together with another group of developers and ran some training workshops. This is all part of an effort to get as many people involved in development as we can, because the bigger the community, the more sustainable it's likely to be. This is an interesting one. I mentioned Afghanistan a couple of times. In Afghanistan, they rebranded COOL Angel, which stands for Afghans Next Generation E-Learning, and they're implementing it at, they've implemented it at Kabul University, and are also implementing it at, in the Public Service Training, Public Service Alliance or Commission or whatever it's called, for their training as well. And just to prove I'm not lying, that's a lecturer at Kabul University who is running Angel training. We've also done some training in the Philippines, and we'll be going back to the Philippines this year in November to run some more. I think we've trained people at 16 universities in the Philippines, so we're reaching out to other places. This is Uganda Martyrs University, a small university in the middle of nowhere in Uganda. And what's interesting there is almost everybody who's involved in the project is a woman, and it's one of the few places that I've been around Africa which has a significant number of women who are actively participating in ICT projects. It tends to be very male-dominated. So that's just to give you an overview of some of the people involved and some of the things they're doing. There's lots of other products besides the e-learning application. I don't think I'm going to bother mentioning those. This is I'll just show you one or two things that have been implemented with the tools created. This is a repository of research on higher education in Africa, which is now up and running, called AHERO. I'm sure you can Google AHERO and find it. This is universities have big problems with committees. You know, everything has got to be done by a committee. And so we have hundreds, if not thousands, of these committees. So we use this system to build a committee administration system for the University of the Western Cape, and it's now also being implemented at a couple of the other universities in our network, I think most recently in Rwanda. This is a site we set up for a HIV/AIDS program, which includes material for learning about living with AIDS as well as how to prevent getting AIDS. And it's also linked to an e-learning site where teacher trainers from around Africa come to learn how to teach teachers how to deal with HIV/AIDS in schools. This is one that we just started last week, which is going to turn into what we hope will be the YouTube for academic presentations. And the idea is to create a site where people can share PowerPoint and OpenOffice and other type presentations, automatically have them be decomposable into their elements, so people can use them also to build new things out of them and to enable communities to grow around them. And we will have this completed by the 15th of September. NetTel Africa, I've mentioned, it's a master's program in ICT policy and regulation. 27 universities around Africa use these tools to run this program collaboratively. We've spent a lot of time on architecture. One of the things we did when we first started this project, we said, well, you know, are there other free and open source software projects that we could join rather than creating a new one? There were a number of reasons why we created a new project rather than joining others. One of them was that we want this project to teach good software engineering principles. And in order to do that, you need a good architecture. And there were not that many frameworks and applications that had a good solid architecture that could be used to teach good software engineering principles. So we spent quite a bit of time on that. And we also wanted something that was, you know, we started this at the time when Web 2.0 was just emerging, and we knew that things were going to be changing over time, so we wanted an architecture that was easily extended. So for example, when the prototype library for doing Ajax stuff came out, it took us half a day to incorporate it. That's it. That's how we made it extensible. And so we spent quite a lot of time on designing, particularly with a focus on the idea of software engineering. So in 2006, we went back to the drawing board and we rebuilt those aspects of the application framework that didn't meet with our vision in terms of the architecture, and we created the second version of the framework. We called it Chisimba, and Chisimba is a Chichewa word. My wife's first language is Chichewa, and she grew up in Malawi. And it's a word for the framework used to build an traditional African house, a round house. And so it seems like a good name for us to use for a framework for building software applications that comes out of Africa. So it's an object-oriented framework for rapid application development, for learning good software engineering practices, and one of the difficulties we find when bringing newbie developers on board this project is that there is a kind of cultural fear of participating in collaboration, of opening yourself up for potential criticism and all of that. And there are different reasons for it in different places, but it's pretty common. And so part of our reason for having our own project is that we can create conditions that help build confidence and help enable people to build confidence in collaborating in international teams. Just a little bit about architecture. It is a model view controller application framework that we're dealing with here. Everything is modular. I'm sure this is all well-known stuff, so I'll just skip over it. What we've put into this framework is we've designed this new architecture. We've got service capacity for doing services-oriented architecture, so you can use this application framework for enterprise development, and that's why we're able to use it within the university to build our student information management system. We try to be standards compliant. We improve the object orientation in the framework. We improve the code generation. We're working currently on enterprise services bus model-driven development, so we can generate code from metadata. And the whole application is, of course, Web 2.0 enabled and ready for what I call Education 3.0. Since I said I'd mention that, I guess I better had. What is Education 3.0? A lot of what is done in education using the internet, using internet technologies today, is still very much along the lines of what I put in this slide, which is we've got 21st century technology, we've got 21st century minds, and we've got 19th century pedagogy. Now, you guys are all here on this wonderful campus, which is at the cutting edge of just about everything. And this may not seem real to you. Yesterday, I put up a slide that said, everywhere is not like Stanford, you know, when I was at Stanford. And I think I could say also, everywhere is not like Google. And so, I'm sorry. So a lot of what is done is really not using technology effectively. So what Philip Smith and I wrote this paper, Genesis and Emergence of Education 3.0 in Higher Education, Its Potential for Africa. You can Google it. And basically, we think a new landscape for education is emerging, and this is because of the arrival of digital natives into education systems and concepts of sharing and licenses and licensing that is happening with Creative Commons licenses, attribution share-alike licenses for content and that kind of thing. New social computing technologies, which you all know about. I often have to explain what I mean when I give this kind of talk, because not everybody knows about that. Emerging educational pedagogies, and interestingly, institutional arrangements that are really only beginning to form. And part of those institutional arrangements is that we have to develop in Africa if we're going to succeed in developing the continent to the level that has happened elsewhere, is we've got to collaborate. And those institutional arrangements have got to foster collaboration. We have to be able to take a good course from this university, a good course from that university, a good course from this one, and combine them together and pool the results. And because nothing else is going to work. We're not going to have a Stanford University in every African country. And unless we can do that, we're not going to see it. Okay, there's my rest of the world is not like Stanford. Actually, that slide has got some interesting, got an interesting tag cloud to go with it. You know, this is the reality for many of us. And even at my university in South Africa, which is relatively well off, these are the things that we have to deal with. Poor schools, underprivileged communities, people living in shacks, underinvestment in education, weak students because they come out of this poor education system, extremely costly bandwidth. Depending on how you slice it, probably anywhere from 30 to 1,000 times as expensive our bandwidth is compared to yours. Most of our students come out of houses where they don't have computers, and security is an issue sometimes. We have just done a project with social work students where we've given them all laptops in a pilot study, and one of the difficulties that they have is that some of them travel by train, and carrying a laptop on a train can put their life in danger. So they can't take the laptop home with them. They have to leave it on the campus because they might get stabbed for the laptop, you know. And food can even be an issue. So those are some of the realities that we have to deal with. What I did is I took a look at some things that we might be able to change, and we might be able to put pressure on in order to change education from the traditional 1.0 version to the 3.0 version, which I think is the only version that's going to get us out of trouble. And I'm not going to go into the details, but those are some of the terms that are in that taxonomy. You can read, if you're interested, you can read the paper. But there are three characteristics that I think we can define. One is that the students have more of a role in making choices, and they make choices of a different kind than are available today. As I said, they may choose to take a course from one university, a course from another university, self-study something, and combine all of that. That doesn't happen at the moment. That's what we're saying we need to get to. Students are able to be much more socially networked, and once they have access to technology, they can be socially networked across disciplines and across countries, not just within their classroom. They can be producers of reusable learning content, because if we allow that and we develop rubrics for assessing students doing reusable work and making them available for free sharing and the creation of derivative works, then the students themselves can become producers and learn through being producers of content. This education model in which you have a teacher who has all the knowledge and students who are empty minds waiting for the knowledge is not necessary anymore. We don't need it. We can change. And then we're going to need those institutional arrangements that permit this. And it's my opinion that if we don't do this in Africa, then we're going to lose the plot. And so one of the reasons behind, one of the drivers behind this AVOIR project is to create the technology and collaborative processes and to speak to each other about how we can change the way in which we structure education and how we can create new opportunities and how we can link those dots that I showed in the first slide, the lights, together virtually to create educational opportunities that we simply don't have at the moment. So how can we engineer the tipping point? We need to do some things. We need to embrace and contribute to free software that's fit for purpose. That's what we're trying to do in the AVOIR project. And free and open standards for sharing and co-creating information. That's also what we're trying to do. A good base of free and open resources for education. And I'm extremely critical of initiatives like OpenCourseWare, because that follows a model that really divides the world into what I call the high-quality world and the low-quality world. That's not my words. That's what the foundation that actually funds the OpenCourseWare project say. in their reports. So, you know, we're turning the world from a developed world into a developing world into a high-quality world and a low-quality world without testing the assumption that the only way to get high-quality learning resources is to do it at MIT and places of that status. It's a completely untested assumption. So what we need is we really need collaborative sharing, not cooperative sharing. And learning processes and structures to take into account lessons from this collaborative development communities. And that's one of the reasons why we have a social network researcher as part of our community, studying how we can build these kinds of communities in other areas, in other disciplines, and start working together across as many boundaries as we can. And we need evidence-based research. There's not much evidence-based research at the moment. Okay, back to AVOIR to finish up and leave some time for questions. Where are we now? Where are we next? And what are some of the potentials? One of the things that we've just started doing is building low bandwidth, integrated real-time collaboration communication tools that are able to use voice and video. We've got some students and developers working on this project at the moment. But I think from the perspective of my visit here today, I just want to build up a picture quickly that we have a network and we have principles and we have people actively collaborating that is in place. We have products such as Cool and the Chisimba application framework that can be used and that can be used to create business opportunities right now. Those things exist. We have an AVOIR board that is a governing board that has only met physically once in its existence. Otherwise, we work by email, mailing lists, and that way. We are currently working on turning some of the work that we're doing into a collaborative master's degree. We have a meeting in Nairobi coming up at the end of May, where we will hopefully finalize this, and we should be in a position to offer a collaborative master's degree in collaborative development of free and open source software in Africa. And it will be online and largely virtual. And it will lead the way in terms of connecting universities and enabling people to do a piece here and a piece there and a piece there. What we are talking about and what I'm talking about with Zaida and Yvonne today, hopefully, is the idea of having a codeathon. Now, Google has a Summer of Code, as you know, but the Summer of Code doesn't really reach the kind of people that we want to reach. It doesn't reach the really newbie developers who are afraid to participate in a collaborative community, who are scared to ask questions, and therefore don't benefit from it. We also are looking at putting together an advisory board, because an advisory board which is made up of people that have done interesting things with free and open source software or free and open content, so that we can learn from their experiences. And then we have the ecosystem. And within that ecosystem, we have various examples of how we can grow that ecosystem through creating business opportunities and so on. And so we need to do things to grow that ecosystem in order to make this thing, to take it beyond the 15 universities that are at the core of this at the moment, so that we are able to cover pretty much every university in Africa that has an internet connection and somebody doing anything with technology. And basically, so what I'm doing, and one of the reasons I travel around the world and speak at every opportunity I can, is I think that we can only do this if we form an alliance which is basically a network of networks. So we have the AVOIR network, we have an alliance with the Netal Africa network, we have an alliance with things that are happening in Afghanistan, we have an alliance with various projects now that are happening at Stanford and Berkeley and University of Maryland and various other places. We are doing things, for example, some software development for projects that are being done at Stanford. We need to strengthen these alliances and grow the alliances to cover other areas. And an alliance, of course, is a network of networks, as I said. And if we can increase the number of networks in the alliance, we can strengthen not only our own AVOIR network, but also the other members of the alliance. My thing just vibrated to tell me that I need to finish up. one of the things we also need to do is reduce our dependency on donor funds by taking on projects and creating business opportunities and engaging with our own internal processes. And so we have moved. When we started, we were totally dependent on donor funds, and we have now moved at least a little bit along that axis, but we still have a ways to go. This was your Google Summer of Code for 2005, and I'm not entirely sure that the dots in Africa are in fact accurate, but nevertheless it does show the scarcity of dots in Africa. And I think part of the reason for that is we just simply don't have a critical mass of developers. And those that are now beginning to learn to do software development are still in that category of being afraid to participate in international collaborative projects. So one of the things that we can do with this AVOIR network and the alliances that it's part of is to bring in these young developers, create opportunities for them to participate in a newbie-friendly development project where they can take on something which is suitable to their skill level and suitable to their confidence level, and start to build confidence and get them up to the point where actually it becomes second nature to them to participate in mailing lists and participate in international collaborative development. Once we've done that, I think you will start to see more of these orange pins in Africa. And then to finish up, the real potential of this network is that we have an application framework that is ready for today's web environment. We have a team that can expand it and build on it in e-learning and pretty much any other application area. It's Web 2.0 enabled, and it's a distributed application, so we can do stuff on mobile phones, as we're doing now, and other devices as well. We have a process to design, develop, deploy, and support what we think is great software and a way to harness the potential of student projects to build capacity. There are potential business opportunities in abundance, I think, if people just learn to see them, as they are beginning to do. And so how can we build synergy with things that are happening here, perhaps at Google, or other initiatives that perhaps you are aware of that could help to strengthen the alliances? So I've tried to summarize this network, this AVOIR, African Virtual Open Initiatives and Resources, by saying we are trying to connect up the dots. We're trying to create this kind of virtual concentration, and doing so by working with universities. We are not by any stretch of the imagination limited to universities. It just happens to be the environment that those of us who started this project know. But we are, of course, open to anyone who wants to work hard and make a contribution or learn from doing it, including businesses, technical institutes, private enterprises, and so on. So thank you very much, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have about the details, given that I didn't really go into detail about anything.
So my understanding from your talk is that the software that you're talking about is developed by people that have a paid job, that work in universities around Africa. Is that correct?
What we've done is we have a grant from the International Development Research Center, the IDRC, which is a Canadian organization, that funds the salary of one developer. And then different institutions have used it differently. So in some, they have paid the salary of one developer, and then that developer acts kind of to supervise student projects. In others, they've said that they've got a person already on their staff who can do that, so they put the money into making bursaries available to students. So it works differently in different countries, and it's going to be interesting to see what happens now, because the IDRC grant is coming to an end, and everybody's undertaken that they won't let the project die just because there isn't donor funding. But it varies depending on which university you're in. In our case, at the University of the Western Cape, we have 30% of a developer's salary, plus we have a salary for the researcher. And everything else that we do is on the basis of projects that we undertake. So if we don't get projects, then we don't exist.
So a follow-up question then. So you mentioned some student involvement. Do you find that students are more employable when they work on this sort of stuff? How does students' job prospect change working on this stuff?
The question is, how do students' job prospects change? Are students more employable as a consequence of working on this project? And I would say extremely yes. You know, a lot of people, when they're looking to hire somebody, they want someone who can conceptualize problems. They don't care what language they've learned. You can learn a language over a few days. You know, they're not interested in whether you know this syntax or that syntax, but that you can conceptualize problems. And that's one of the things that they learn, is they learn how to conceptualize problems. Before they write any code, they must write a white paper. They must be able to conceptualize the problem, discuss it with other people, take criticism, and so on. And certainly, at the University of the Western Cape, we have a great deal of difficulty keeping our interns around till they finish because they get offered jobs. Yeah. It varies, of course, depending on which country people are in. I think in Tanzania they also have that problem. The students just get soaked up very quickly by industry.
Sort of along those lines, you mentioned kind of putting processes in place to design, develop, deploy, and support the software. Are there businesses kind of commercial aspects to being able to kind of set up companies for supporting it?
The question was, are there commercial aspects to this concept of design, deploy, develop, design, you know what I mean, design, develop, deploy the software. Are there commercial prospects? This project has been in existence only for 2 years. We haven't spun out any commercial businesses, but we would be very happy if someone wanted to and wanted to create business opportunities using this software. Just the same way that people have created businesses implementing other tools like Joomla and those kinds of things. You know, there are lots of businesses, small to medium enterprise kind of businesses that's all they do. They just implement those things. So we would love to see that happen, but it hasn't happened yet.
Another question? Can you talk a little bit about the collaboration tools? You mentioned that you're bandwidth constrained, and I'm just interested to know a little bit about how you collaborate and communicate across teams that are either distributed or just within your own frameworks.
So the question is, given that we are bandwidth limited, how do we collaborate and communicate across teams since we're distributed around 12 or so countries? And well, the answer to that is we just use what has always worked for collaborative software development since the early days of the internet. We use mailing lists, and we use a code repository that is mainly text-based, so we use CVS. We do have other repository types running in our network, but people still choose CVS over everything else, simply because they have the skills and it's easy and it's relatively simple for them to do so. And since it's mostly just moving text around, it works even at the low bandwidth. And then we do have discussion forums, and we do occasionally try to have voice over IP type conversations, but it doesn't work out because even in some of the universities that are participating, even a simple IRC chat doesn't work. You know, there just isn't even enough bandwidth for that.
How do you see the mobile platform becoming more important or more of a learning tool or research tool for your students? Do you see that increasing, or is it still going to be the notebook? I know you mentioned some problems with the notebooks being stolen. Or will the mobile platform, handheld devices, help with that, or will it still be a problem?
So the question is, how do we see mobile devices playing a role, and or are we just looking at students having access to notebooks and that kind of thing? I think as mobile devices are improving, they will become increasingly important, but they're still very expensive. So in the project with our social work students, for example, we were intending to use a mobile device out of India called a Mobilis, which is developed by Vinay Deshpande, the guy who did the Simputer. It's a company called Encore Software. And they were simply unable to deliver them on time for us to use. And so we ended up having to buy secondhand notebooks as a replacement for these mobile devices. We are doing some work also with mobile phones, and but that is just at the beginning stage, and that is still fairly informal, but it involves some collaboration with Stanford University and a couple of other universities that are interested in mobile devices. I think National University of Rwanda is also beginning to develop a lab for doing mobile work as well. So I think that's something that we will see expand over the next year or two. But it's something that we're just getting into at this stage. We have done some development using the Gecko engine, using Zool, to be able to enable students to synchronize with the learning environment so that they can have their work with them when they go away from the campus, because unlike here, you don't find wireless hotspots all over the place. So when they go out in the community, and many of the students are out working in communities, especially social work and nursing and people like that, they're out in township communities where they simply don't have access. So we've done these applications that run on the desktop that will pick up the Wi-Fi and will synchronize their content with them so they can work offline when they're out in the community. Okay, thank you very much.